Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. In this world, there are still many monasteries. There are monasteries in the East, and there are monasteries in the West. There are monasteries in various religions. Now imagine if you were someone who decided to enter into a monastery. Think about the fact that you enter and you give up all of your worldly possessions. You give up everything that you own and everything that you have, and you're limited to having the clothes that you wear and a few small items, depending on the religion that you're in, that you can keep with you. The Buddhists would have a begging bowl. The Catholics would have their Bible and their cross. The Greek Orthodox would have whatever they're allowed to keep. But in essence, you would be stripped of worldly possessions. This stripping of worldly possessions is to create a distance between yourself and the attachments to the world. There's a reason for it. And the reason is so that you can totally surrender yourself to Allah. You can totally surrender yourself to God. You have nothing else that you have to take care of. You have nothing else that burdens you. You have nothing else that holds you back from an unconditional surrender to God. Now, the people who go into the monasteries, who become cloistered, do this as a permanent lifestyle. We, on the other hand, live in the world. We live amongst men who are worldly, and we live amongst worldly inclinations and worldly traumas and worldly problems. And we have to deal with all of these things. We live in families where we have to take care of children, spouses, relatives, all kinds of situations. However, this does not mean that we can't create a space in our life that is detached from the world. That we cannot create a space in our life when, at least for a moment or so, we can be without any of the burdens that the world gives us. When God created existence, since God permeated everything, there are different stories, creation stories, in different mystical traditions that say, in order for God to be able to create the world, he had to create an empty space because he was everywhere and everything. So in the Kabbalah says he created a space and then created the world in it. The Islamic mystics say he created a cloud and created everything within that cloud. Well, in the same way, Allah created an empty space to create the world. We need to create an empty space so that we can allow our relationship with God to be all that there is in that space. There's nothing to stop us from mentally detaching from the world at least for a while. There's nothing to stop us from releasing all of the burdens that we carry, at least for a while. And we should try to make a daily practice of releasing ourselves from all of the shackles that bind us to this worldly existence, that to release ourselves from all of the attachments that bind us to this worldly existence. Whether we have a multitude of things or not, we are in a position where mentally we are bound to things. Do you think that the beggar is any less bound to his loincloth and his few pennies than the king is bound to his entire kingdom? Do you believe that the strength of the attachment that the beggar has to his few cents is any different than what the king has to all of his wealth? Attachment is a funny thing. People will kill over millions of dollars, and they'll also kill over a few pennies. The attachments are that strong, and the circumstances of both, when attachment is powerful, raise emotions that are overwhelming. We need to be able to overcome this emotional attachment to what we have and to what we think we need. You see, the attachment to what we think we need is as strong as the attachment to what we have. There's no difference. Attachment is an imaginary thing. Now, you may have a car in your driveway. It can be a vehicle that gets you around, or it can be a symbol of status as to who you are and be intermingled with your very being. You may have a home, and that home can be a place to protect you from the elements and a place to live, or it can become a symbol of who you are. It can become in your mind the exemplar of your status, the exemplar of your place in the world. And it's like that with attachments. As long as our things represent who we are, as long as our things are part of our inner being, as opposed to just external things that we use, they become intermingled with our psyche and become very difficult for us to release ourselves from. And that's why, at the very least, we should set up a scenario, a play, where once in a day we go to the monastery and we relieve ourselves of all our possessions. We relieve ourselves of everything that we have. And we do this by releasing our inner attachment to these things so that internally we become free of the influence of all of these elemental things that we've collected over the years for various reasons. Some reasons out of need, some reasons out of status. There was a man who wrote a book in the 1880s on economics, and he called the name of the book The Theory of conspicuous consumption. And his treatise was that people didn't buy things because they needed them. People didn't have things because they needed them. People accumulated things so that other people could see what they had, and so it would raise their status. So that most things were bought not out of necessity, but out of the need to show others that you had it. And the advertising agencies have certainly caught on to this, and they advertise as if your status depends on having these things. And I'm sure you've all seen these ads. We have to escape from this mentality. We have to escape from the need to have. Now, obviously, if we're going to be existing within this world, we need homes and we need to have things. When I was about 27 years old, I was troubled by these thoughts about having things. And I went to Bawa Muhaiyaddeen and I said, is it okay to buy a house? Is it okay to have personal property? And he literally laughed at me. And he said, not only do you need a house, you better hurry up and buy one because they're only going to get more expensive as time goes on. So get in while you can still afford them. So there's no question that we need things in this world. And since we aren't monastic and we don't live a monastic lifestyle, we surround a house with furnishings. We landscape. We do all these things to our homes and to the places that we live. But the question is, how attached are we to them? And what impact does it have on who we are? Right now, we're informed that in California, there are blazing fires that are spreading throughout much of the state, and houses are being burned, and possessions are going up in flames, and things that people have collected for their entire lives are disappearing. So it all comes down to this question: who are you? Are you your possessions? Are you your accumulations? Are you your wealth? Are you your fame? Are you your house? Are you your cars? Are you your titles? Who are you? What are you? Where did you come from? What is the status of our being? The Christians say you have to be born again. That doesn't mean to become a new you. It means to become the real you. So, can we be born again into ourselves? Can we be born again knowing who we are? Can we be born again so that we recognize the truth about ourselves? Now, what we have to understand that intermingled with knowing ourselves is knowing our Lord. We can't truly know ourselves if we don't know our Lord. And we can't truly know our Lord if we don't know ourselves. There is this great mystery of man in God and God in man. And we have to go to the place where we contemplate that mystery about ourselves. Now, each one of us is open to that same path, to that same route, to those same mysteries. Each one of us has to bring ourselves to that place of inner recognition. And the more things that we are attached to in the external world, the more difficult it is for us to delve inside of ourselves. Jesus said, it is more difficult for a rich man to enter heaven than for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. Well, what is a rich man? A rich man is somebody who carries his wealth with him. A rich man is somebody whose constant thought has to do with his wealth. His image of himself is rich. Rich in what? Rich in worldly possessions. You can't move forward towards spirituality with possessions. There's an ancient story of an island that had a despot as a king, and he wouldn't let anybody off the island. And he noticed that people were escaping in ships or little boats, so he banned boats from the island. And he banned the word swimming from the dictionary. He banned the use of certain terms that had to do with escape. But people, when they were talking to each other, found that there were teachers within the island who could show you how to escape from the chains of this despot. And if you were fortunate, you could find one. And men would go to look for these teachers, and every once in a while, someone would find one. And what this man, the teacher, had to offer was he taught people how to swim. And he explained that there was a way, if you learned how, that you could move through the water and move through the water long enough to reach land somewhere else and escape from the island. And people would become enthusiastic with the teacher. And then they said, well, give me time to make provisions, to take my furniture and to take food and to take various other personal items that I need. And then he explained to them that you can't swim and take furniture. You can't swim and take provisions. You have to be able to go for a period of time without this. And when you get to this other place, you can't bring any of these things with you. It's a different situation. And most people refused to go further because they couldn't give up their possessions. We are all in that same boat. Now, we have personal freedom, but we are on our own journey, and our own journey is tied very much to our mental attitudes towards this existence and our ideas about this existence. And if our ideas about this existence have to do with wealth, with possessions, with fame, with titles, these are all chains that bind us to the elemental world. And if we want to be able to leave this elemental world and go into the spiritual plane and understand the spiritual plane, we have to release ourselves from the elemental plane. Yet, we are brought up in constant interaction with the elemental plane, and most of the teaching that goes on in the public schools in our country and most other countries is about how to succeed in the elemental world and how to manipulate the elemental world so that you can accumulate things from this elemental world. As a matter of fact, things have gotten to the point, at least in America, where because of certain manipulation of the legal system, we're not allowed to talk about spiritual things in our public schools. God has been stricken from the public schools. So they're even more concentrated now on just the elemental world alone. And the spiritual world is non-existent. Now, why are we gathering together to talk about these things? Why have we sought spiritual teachers to teach us about these things? Why do we go to holy scriptures to learn about these things? Because we, each of us, has developed a longing to try and understand the inner workings of who we are, the inner workings of our creation, the inner workings of our being, an understanding that is beyond this elemental world. We somehow have an intuitive knowledge that there's more to existence than meets the eye, that there are things that we can't see that are as important or more important than the things that we can see. And we have developed a yearning for those things. We have developed a yearning that is overwhelming in our being to know more than what textbooks teach us about zoology and biology and physics and all of the things that man looks into and tries to explain. We want explained to us who we are. We want to know internally who we are. We want to know the truth about our being and the truth about our interrelationship with our Creator. Now, all of us have had moments of divine intervention. We've all had moments when the reality of God was so strong, we felt it throughout our entire being. It could have been at the birth of a baby. It could have been when we saw someone passing. It could have been when we saw someone saved from what seemed like a immediate disaster. We saw intervention, and we saw God's intervention. Well, when we saw these, we were elevated. We became transcendent, and we knew. But this fades with time. We go back to our normative interaction with the world and our normative interaction with the elemental world. We go back to our thought patterns that are constantly bringing up all of our needs, our desires, our fears, our trepidations, all of the conflicts that we're involved in, all of the hurt that has come to us, all of the people who we need to reckon with or be reckoned with. We bring up all of these things that the mind can conjure. And the mind is constantly conjuring things. It's something that doesn't end. But what we need to do is go to this place where we say to ourselves, a good word would be, okay, this is a time out. Everything stops. You've seen in sports, they call a timeout and the game just stops. It stops for a couple of minutes so that everybody can do a reckoning of what's going on and what they have to do later. Well, we need a timeout from the world. There was a song in the 60s, Stop the World, I Want to Get Off. Well, we need to stop the world for ourselves. We need to stop all of our interaction with the world for ourselves. We have to take a time out from the world and relieve ourselves of all of the anxiety and stress that the world gives us. You know, each of us worries. Now imagine if you worry all of your waking hours. And let's assume you're awake 16 hours a day. So you worry 16 hours a day, or at least you think about your worldly situation for 16 hours a day. And you do this because you think that that somehow is going to help with your worldly situation. Well, imagine instead of worrying about the world for 16 hours a day, you only worried about it for 15 hours a day. You gave yourself a break from the world for an hour every day. Do you believe that would really change the nature of your existence? That would really hinder your involvement within the material world? Well, what happens is if you can give your break, you can give yourself that break for an hour. Soon after that period of time, your attachment will not be as strong, and you will find that when you go back, nothing has really changed. And soon, over time, you will develop a different attitude towards existence. You will see that things are constantly changing, and your mindset as to how things are isn't necessarily true, and things go on without your constant manipulation of them. In other words, you're not running things. God is running things. And you'll find sometimes if your interaction is diminished and you allow God's interaction to take over, things will occur in a way that works out better for you than if your own interaction was constantly trying to move things. So we need to practice releasing ourselves from all of our attachments to this elemental world. You see, these attachments to the elemental world are very much like fish hooks. When you go fishing, you throw a hook into the water and you hope that a fish bites. And then once the fish is bitten, the fish is subject to you and the fishing pole and the way that you pull it and the way that you let it run and the way that you pull it again. Well, it's the same thing with the world. The world throws fish hooks into us. And then we go in the way that those fish hooks go. We have no choice because we're caught. Now, it is painful to remove a fish hook because it has a double barb, has a barb going in, and then it has another barb going out that rips you. So we have to go through the pain of the acknowledgement of the foolishness of our attachments. We have to go through the pain of the acknowledgement of all of the things that we've done and all of the time that we've wasted in order to accumulate all of these things that pull us around the world and keep us enchained and keep us subject to them. How did this happen? When did we stop watching ourselves? When did we look away for a moment and all of a sudden get caught up in all of the drama and tribulations of this world. How did 25 years go by so quickly? How did 50 years go by so quickly? How did 75 years go by so quickly? And we still carry the same thoughts and imaginations that we carried 15 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 30 years ago. How come nothing's changed in the way we are? In the Conference of the Birds, there are intermittent stories. And one of the stories is about a man who works as a grave digger. And he's been a grave digger for 50 years. And somebody came up to him after a funeral and he said, "You know, you've been doing this for 50 years. Is there anything that you've learned putting all these bodies in the ground over that period of time?" And his response was that he learned how, even with seeing all of these bodies go in the ground and seeing the end to so many lives, he hasn't changed himself at all. And he said, this acknowledgement that I haven't changed at all and why I haven't changed at all is the big mystery in my life. Well, we all suffer from this mystery. Why don't we change? Why don't we alter? Why don't we release ourselves from all of the burdens of carrying the world? What's the reason? Is it some kind of sadomasochistic tendency that we all have? Are we trying to torture ourselves with the world? What's the worst that can happen if we don't have the things that we have? Somehow we will be taken care of. We don't have to worry about it. The Buddhists say that the only way to salvation is to let go of everything. Now, the monastics literally try to let go of everything. But the problem that they have is they still carry their minds with them when they go into the monastery. So even though they've let go of everything in the external world, they still have their mind and they still have all the hallucinations of their mind that they carry. And many of us believe in this hallucinating swirl that goes on in our heads, and as if it can somehow save us and feed us and protect us through all eternity. Well, here's the bad news. It can't, and it won't. And when things get difficult, they'll say, well, I didn't know what I was doing. Why'd you listen to me? It's your fault. But you told me over and over and over. Well, it's your fault for listening to a fool. The mind and Satan will always have an excuse. And the blame will always go back to you. So let's take the responsibility for ourselves. Let's not rely on others. Let's not look to others. Let's not blame others. Let's begin to take direct action on our own being to become detached from the elemental world in a way that allows us to move freely into our relationship with God. We can't swim and carry furniture. We can't swim and carry provisions. There comes a time when we have to give up all of our ideas and all that we have, whether we're rich or whether we're poor. The end sum is zero. And we all have to be able to get to that end game. And whether we go voluntarily or not, that end game is going to come. And that moment when everything is given up is going to come. And when are we going to do that? Are we going to be forced into it, or can we do it voluntarily? The Sufi path is about reaching that zero end game voluntarily. And that's what to die before death means. To be in that state where we've given up our attachments and our needs and our mind's machinations, and we focus on truth and reality, where Hak, reality, God's reality, becomes our reality, where we put ourselves into Allah's qualities as opposed to the elemental qualities and things of the world, where we stop dealing with things and we start dealing with qualities, and things become less and less and less important to us. This has to be our prayer. And when we enter into that moment of seclusion every day, when we give up everything, one of the things that we have to pray for is that when we leave this moment of seclusion, our mental attitude of not needing things will remain. There's a city in northern Turkey called Kastamonu, and there was a great Sufi saint who lived there. His name was Shaban Vali, and they built a mosque there, and it's a 2-story mosque, and the second story is a balcony that overlooks the first floor of the mosque where they prayed. And the back of the mosque on the second story is a semicircle. It goes around 180 degrees. And every 3 or so feet in that semicircle is a door. And these doors are open into a small area that is about 6 foot in and about 3 or 4 feet wide. And after prayers, the dervishes used to go upstairs and go into these rooms and meditate. And I'm sure you understand by now that these rooms represented graves. And so they went and they walked voluntarily into their graves to go to a point where they had nothing and gave up everything and came face to face with themselves and reality, with no world in between. We need to go to that place where we come face to face with our ultimate reality, with our ultimate truth, with our ultimate understanding of who it is we are and who it is that our Lord is. We need to bring ourselves to that place. We need to make a constant effort to go to that place and to be in that place. And as we do that, the veils that hide the truth from us will disappear, because the veils are all of the thought images that we hold on to. And as we relieve ourselves of thought images of desire and needs, of thought images of possessions and things that we carry, the veils will become less and less, and our pathway to reality will become clearer and stronger and stronger, and the straight path will open up in front of us without any impediments. May that happen for each of us. Amen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.